Hello and welcome to Unit 7 for our Latin American history class. This unit is quite different than the others that we've gone through thus far. For Unit 7 we'll be focusing on Greg Grandin's The Last Colonial Massacre. There it is. Which hopefully you've purchased, you have already, hopefully you've been reading already. What I want to do here with this introduction is just give you some ideas about how to proceed with the reading of the book and the preparations that you'll need to make for completing the book review assignment that will be due on the last day of class. When you read an academic work, it often makes sense not to just read it in order. So when you read for pleasure, you pick up the book, you start from the beginning, you read through chapter by chapter, line by line. But with academic work, it's a good idea to look at some reviews first. That's why I've posted some links to book reviews of Grandin's work. It's also a good idea to read the introduction in detail, then maybe flip back to the conclusion in detail, read those so that you can get a sense of what Grandin is trying to say here. Historians often deal with the issue of historiography in the introductions and conclusions to their books. What that means, what historiography is essentially the history of what's been written about this topic so far. So Grandin will go through and if I'm remembering right, it's been a few weeks since I read the intro now to this book, but he'll discuss ways in which other historians have written about the violence in Guatemala, the ways in which they've written about the Guatemalan Revolution of 1944, the time previous, and then he'll explain how what he's doing here is a bit different, how it contributes to added knowledge of this topic, how he's presenting this situation from a different angle. So pay attention to that and then think about what are his arguments. So he's saying this is my different angle of looking at this, and this is why Guatemala is significant, or this is why my different angle is significant and provides insights. So again, I'm just trying to give you some cues to look for as you're looking for argument, evidence, interpretations, and so on. And again, you'll find a lot of this in the intro, the conclusion. You'll want to skim through the chapters in the middle. Kind of read them selectively, figure out what is the point that the author is making in each chapter. Although there is an overarching argument, and that's what I'm asking you to point out in the reading worksheet. And as I mentioned there's not necessarily one right answer to that. You can say, this is what I found Grandin's overall thesis to be, and then provide evidence. Here are the examples of why I think this is the thesis. That might mean that all of you present different ideas about what the thesis is. What I'll be looking for is how well you made your case, how well you provided evidence for the thesis that you found. This is important because in your book review you need to identify the thesis and then evaluate how well the author supported his thesis. That's kind of the core of the review that you'll be writing. So I'm alerting you to look out for that from the get-go. As I mentioned in the written introduction here, you'll want to look at the footnotes, or I guess they're the endnotes in this case, if you're not accustomed to doing that, to figure out what kinds of sources Grandin is using. Figure out when is he using a secondary source, when is he using a primary source, what types of primary sources are they. And in this book, especially if you have the updated edition, there are some added helps, I think. There's a preface to the new edition. He has a preface to the first edition and then the introduction. Also in the updated edition there's an interview with journalist Naomi Klein in which Grandin discusses how his views kind of changed between 2004 and 2011 when the updated version or edition was published. So all of those things will help you kind of get figure out a lens through which you can evaluate the book. I wanted to point out just a couple of other things too, since I have the book here in front of me. Let me flip here to page 203. I have the updated edition. And if you go just a page before that, so to 201, you'll see that there's an appendix that lists the dead from the Ponceos Massacre that provides kind of the central theme or central event around which the book was written. On 203 is a glossary. Keep this in mind. I dog-eared the page so that I could go back to it. whenever I needed to. There's a list of Spanish terms that are used throughout the book that are defined here. One of the most important being the term Ladino, which is, he puts it here as a general term used to describe Guatemalans who are not Mayans. Or, usually I think in the Mexican case, these people would be referred to as mestizos, but in Guatemala they're called Ladinos. So all these kinds of things are outlined there. Also the acronyms. Acronyms appear throughout this book. They're all listed here, what they mean, what they were, in the back. So that's a good thing to look for. The notes begin on page 207, and at the bottom you'll notice that it says notes to pages 15 through 19. So if you are on page 15, you want to see what note 37 says, you flip to the back where that note 37 appears. There's also an index, which would be quite helpful at the end. You should also figure out a way of taking notes as you go along. I do that a number of different ways. I like to scribble in books. I like to use the inline annotating features when I read ebooks. And something else that I do, this one's not as extensive as some, but here in the back cover, I make my own sort of index of different things that stood out to me, that struck me, that I know I want to come back to. I also don't mind dog-earing pages. If you're hesitant to do that, use tabs or sticky notes to mark pages where information you'll want to go back to and use, or where to find that information as you write your book review. I also don't mind writing in margins, so you can see, there we go, sorry, it's hard to do this. You can see that I've done that on this page. I've also dog-eared that page. On page 52, he discusses a key point about how interpretations of the Cold War, looking at Guatemala, tend to put Guatemala in a situation where we're viewing it through the lens of U.S. power in Guatemala, and we don't see the contributions that the Guatemalan Communist Party or the PGT made to establishing democracy during the revolution, and even during the years following 1954, when civil war and violence ran rampant. That's a key interpretive thing that's discussed here on this page. So I've folded it down, written it in the margin. The last thing I want to say before closing this video out is that this book is somewhat unique. It's a bit more dense than I had remembered it as I'm rereading it here. I just finished it on the plane for my conference a few days ago again. But each chapter presents a certain case study of different perspectives on the meaning of the Guatemalan Revolution, so that democratic opening under Arévalo and then Arbenz, and then different perspectives on the CIA-sponsored intervention in 1954 and how people made sense of that in the aftermath during the 50s, 60s, 70s, why the violence spiked. But also we often get a picture in our minds of these U.S.-sponsored cronies in Guatemala who are running the authoritarian military dictatorships, which those people were there. Those are the bad guys. Those are the people committing the violence, and we see the people in the countryside as kind of the pure beneficiaries of the democratic opening. It's a lot more complicated than that. There aren't just two sides. In all of the various poblaciones or towns that Grandin discusses in the book, there are people who have a whole wide range of viewpoints on all of these things. Sometimes they're at odds with each other. Sometimes small Ladino landholders are hellbent on keeping Quechua Mayan peasants under their thumb, even though they had previously supported Arbenz, for example. So something that Grandin does very well here is to present the messiness of the situation in Guatemala. There's no pure two ideologies kind of battling against each other, but instead different forms of democracy were struggling to take shape as authoritarian regimes tried to squash them in the 60s and 70s. So hopefully that's a picture you'll be able to get there. Please ask me questions as you go along if you have them, or as they pop up either via email or text or Twitter. Also, please let me know on Twitter or via email what you think of the book, kind of in a more informal way. I noticed it was more dense than I had remembered it being, so please let me know your thoughts on that. Was it hard to read? Was it something you get into or not? And let me know why. And I'm thinking of that in terms of whether or not I'll use it in the future in this class. So thanks, and I hope you enjoy Unit 7.